that Bloody Mary ascended to the throne in England and took over the authority as monarch. She was a Roman Catholic. All Bibles were removed from churches. All Bible printing ceased. All Bible reading was forbidden. 800 English ministers fled to Geneva. She massacred 283 Protestants.
In this section, Mr. McArthur demonizes Mary Tudor and says that she basically makes her sound like the devil, someone who just killed Protestants because they were Protestants and because she was Catholic. And this is how low and dishonest Mr. McArthur unfortunately is, or perhaps how ignorant of history he is, because anti-Catholics usually just read other anti-Catholics rather than actual sources. They demonize her while ignoring Protestant King Henry VIII, who killed many people as a Protestant as well. So I want to quickly give the facts here so we can see how much anti-Catholics skew church history and how much slander they give to the church unfairly. Now, King Henry VIII killed Catholics, massacred them, shut down like 1,000 abbeys and convents, confiscated lands. He had an all-out war against the Catholics in his country because he was throwing a temper tantrum that he couldn't get remarried and the Pope wouldn't approve it. And so anybody who disagreed with him was killed or excommunicated or had lands confiscated for them. There was some big price that they had to pay if they disagreed with King Henry. He had 1,000 abbeys and priories closed, and 200 priests and nuns alone were killed just for resisting and just for saying no, they weren't going to close their abbeys. And we know that some of his closest confidants, like people who he was friends with, like Sir Thomas More, killed because he wouldn't agree with King Henry over the Pope. Anyone who still sided with the Pope was killed. Now, this had no precedence. He just didn't like the Pope, and he didn't want people agreeing with the Pope. And so if you didn't agree with him, many times you were killed or had some other consequence. This was entirely different than Mary Tudor, who Protestants dub Bloody Mary, who is unfairly characterized by history, as even many Protestants admit, and even many historical organizations like the History Channel admit. Mary Tudor was actually a very good lady, very nice, and she came into power after King Henry, who was her father, and all she did was reverse his anti-Catholic legislation. She allowed Catholics to be Catholic. She allowed them to worship freely. She allowed them to go to Mass. She gave them their lands back. She just reversed the things he had done. No problem. Nothing about Protestants. Nothing about, demonizing or killing or anything else. So what happened? What is the real historical context here? The problem came in 1554 when Mary Tudor was going to marry King Philip of Spain. And he was very Catholic, obviously, and this worried many Protestants, and they didn't want her to go through with it, but she was going to go through with it anyways. And so what happened next? The Protestants went to war against her. They created a violent insurrection against her and tried to stop her physically. So while she gets a bad rap for killing Protestants, they're actually the ones who tried to kill her, who actually started a violent insurrection against her in the first place. This is the context in leaps and bounds different than King Henry, who just didn't like the Pope, was throwing a temper tantrum, and pretty much annihilated anyone in his path that disagreed with him. Mary Tudor, on the other hand, literally had to make an appeal to her citizens to protect her. She had to get thousands of people to rise up and protect her and fight against the insurrection, and eventually they did, and they were able to fight it off this time. But from then on, at that point, she killed 300 Protestant leaders to make a point. I mean, literally, they tried to kill her. Literally, they made an insurrection against her. And so this was in a time of war. That context is actually very needed. And even historical societies, like the History Channel, say so. And they say that she was actually a good lady, but after this, she started to be very concerned about Protestants and see that they were a big threat. So she killed 300 of the leaders to make a point. Now, when she did this in a time of war, in self-defense, maybe to make sure that it never happens again. And some people admit that perhaps she took it too far and went overboard with it by killing these 300 Protestants. But in her mind, perhaps, she was preventing this from ever happening again and making sure that her kingdom was safe. Whatever it was a time of war. It wasn't unprovoked. It wasn't like she just went around killing Protestants like King Henry just went around killing Catholics. It wasn't like that at all. This is infinitely more understandable in this context, but Protestants have just said look at their writing. She's Bloody Mary. She's a killing machine. She murdered Protestants everywhere. And they make it sound like she just murdered them for no reason whatsoever, except for the fact that she wanted to make England Catholic again, and they were Protestants, so she killed them. When in fact, the facts of history disagree with these conspiracy theories, and they paint a whole different picture of both Protestants and Catholics at the time. And the fact that what King Henry did was unjust. There was a lot more justice in what Mary Tudor did in defending her throne and rising up and protecting herself. And again, maybe she did take it too far. Maybe she did go a little bit overboard, but the context of history is infinitely different than the everlasting temper tantrum that King Henry threw against the Pope and Catholics who wouldn't agree with him.